it also has created a very fast moving, quickly changing environment for everyone, individuals, for families, young, old, wherever you are in the spectrum of life. And that speed has, I believe, affected how people perceive going to church on a Saturday night or a Sunday, um, and how they perceive the church as being a priority in their weekly to do and get done list.
I think that approximately 40 years ago, we were living much slower pace in life.
Mhm.
People may have been involved in many things, but it wasn't the same type. Um, the children played in the backyard and they rode their bicycles to go places. Families got together uh, and did things in their homes. Neighbors knew each other, and today many of us don't know our neighbors that are living next door or across the street because we are so involved in what each of us are doing at the moment today. Uh, So we're just a much faster pace. And though there was less money then, I don't think people felt that they were poor, even though their annual income might have been only around $22,000 a year, to compare to people can't even get by it hardly, I don't think, on much more than 70 or $100,000 if they can even survive on that today. It's just totally different in the way in which we are finding ourselves.
That's changed dramatically is that our social connections have become much less concentrated around a church community and much more diffuse. We can have friends across the globe and be in regular contact with them, while, as Eileen was saying, our neighbors next door we may not know. And 50, 100 years ago, our social structures were really built around our worship communities, and many of our social activities surrounded or intersected with those communities. And today, it's not necessary. Right? We're not necessary for, for a child's recreation, for a family's for a family to spend their time or to have socialization. They do other things, and because of that, that concentrated experience that we may have had 50 years ago is now a very different experience. And we have members of our church community who have moved away but have remained a member of our church community, and we have people living right next door to our church who have never been inside the building. Right? And those are very different circumstances than some time ago.
The way we process news and what we receive as far as news is different. A local newspaper was one of the sources and maybe one or two channels, but now people get news from all sorts of different streams of information, and even just the critical thinking about what that means is, I think, changing culture in a lot of ways. Different generations receive news differently too. So
church's role in the culture, I'd tag on to what Steve said. The church had a central role within particularly small towns. The church had a central role in the family and in the community. The church was looked to as a kind of compass, a moral compass. It was the place to engage your spiritual journey. Now we're certainly more marginalized as we are seen, but the number of people, if you look at Pew Research or Barna Research, the number of people who say they believe in God and who pray, that number has not really dropped precipitously. But the number of people engaging in the church or in churches as a place for encountering God, for prayer, for engagement in community, that has dropped off. So that has been a shift in the past 40 years.
I would argue that church we've ceded our moral authority and our right to assume a moral high ground based upon some of the things that we have been too uncomfortable to openly talk about, address, and tackle. And so, to what extent has culture simply changed, and life is different, and to what extent have we ceded the moral high ground and made ourselves no longer so relevant?
Many ways, the secular world has taken over a lot of what the church used to be, in concerning social issues and problems that exist, and the church has been too quiet about it. And in a lot of ways, it's allowed. There's a lot of competition out there now. The web is full of organizations and that do sort of the same thing that the church did at one time, and it's kind of left us on the margins, on the sidelines as it's gone.
We have to figure out what is our role in this new changed environment. And preachers, people can get a great message online. They can tune in to all kinds of preachers, but understanding the role of the church as community, and a voice within within a spiritual community, and within our larger community is a different thing. Once upon a time, you went to church to get that good message and take it home, but people can get messages, as George said, from a lot of different avenues. So how do we reclaim our space for spiritual formation, engagement, and community? I know in church we used to vote different ways, but we all loved each other and we could discuss it. And the day after Election Day, we went on to our what should we do now? But the climate around us is finding its way, I think, unfortunately, into some of our engagement within the church. And we are struggling across those differences.
What's happening in our culture that people seem to be less willing to engage with the people who voted differently, people who think differently. Yeah.
I come from a public education background, and I was cognizant of the fact that if I was teaching, if I was administering whatever I was doing, it was not my position to be telling students or parents or colleagues they should believe in this political leader or this affiliation. I was there to present knowledge. I was there to lead people and perhaps to help bring people together. Being the church, I don't think it's our position to take a stand about certain things. I think our doors should be open to whomever, whenever, however we possibly can.
You know, I'll speak for myself. For me, I need to discern what is the morally correct position to take at certain times. And all of our moral decisions, when they're at the most heightened stress in our society, become politicized, and finding a way to navigate that as a public institution, in the case of a school, or as a religious community institution, as our parishes do, is a really tough set of decisions. You know, what are you willing to put yourself on the line for? You know, what is it that you stand for? And I think there are some things that are absolutely sort of political gray zones that we stay out of. Who do you vote for? What your party affiliation is? And yet there are some things that are moral stances that I, as a Christian, have to struggle with. And if I struggle with them privately and never talk about them, I don't have the benefit of being in that community of Christians that I really rely on for my own growth and my own humanity and my own Christianity.
I agree with Steve in that context, that it's a fine line to talk about our discernment with, if we don't talk about it, if it just becomes something that becomes sidewalk conversation, and we don't actually bring the lessons and the spiritual lessons and the religious lessons that come forward with us. If we're really afraid to touch them at all, then I think we've surrendered way too much. And that's part of why church is often seen by younger generations as being irrelevant. It's like, we don't offer anything, so what? I can get the same thing from a social club or from a community meeting. But the morality and the ability to wrestle with ourselves and with other people and their opinions, I don't get it in many other places than places that are spiritually grounded. And church is one of them, a major one for me. Limina brought up a particular point that you can get some of this in society now. You can get moralistic stands on recycling, and you can get it on all sorts of things. But we as church have kind of surrendered by being so quiet and allowing the news to only pay attention to the church voices that are very loud and not necessarily speaking from a place that I can embrace. And yet we've been really, really quiet about it. We've been way too polite.
Gail, church nice is it is the antithesis of good.
There's this idealized Christianity that I think I certainly have in my heart. And I want to be this person who is unflappable and loving and kind. And I find that the world challenges those desires on my part every single day. And it is in those moments when I find myself irritated or judgmental or even just at odds with my neighbor that I need some guidance on what to do next. I need some guidance on how to handle those conversations. And I practice them and I get better at them. But I know there are very good people in my life who have different ideas about very important topics. And gosh, it's so hard to navigate those conversations when we don't belong to the same clubs anymore. We don't belong to the same house of worship anymore. We don't go in the same places anymore. Yet we still are in community, in the greater community around us. There's this morality of the other that we talk about a lot in our society and in our public discourse. And we don't talk as much about the morality of ourselves and our own growth. I think about how much tension do you reveal in these very difficult moral questions that our society faces. How much do you press somebody on their ideas? How much do you say, yeah, I hear you, and consider this other point, or I don't want to hear you, this is a fact. How do you do that? It's I find myself thinking about that a lot, and one of the places where I have a chance to refresh that and retool my compass is as a part of my worship community. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's a lot of people who don't have that or feel that they don't need that or feel that they don't want that. But for me, it's essential. And I think without that, ironically, I wouldn't have so many questions. I'd be much more certain. And the discomfort of my questions and my uncertainty is what continues to drive me back to my worship community and to look for answers in scripture and tradition and reason.
People need to tell their stories, and their stories are sometimes just what happened today at the grocery store, what frustration or what people want to vent. People need to share their concern about a relative that they're giving care to. There's so many things that we want and need to talk about. And the pandemic took us into isolation. As an educator, I worry a lot about the fact that, conversations were on Zoom, or you couldn't even see the children that, were in the classroom, so that there was this loss of contact. And I think telling our stories, whether it's just funny stories about things that have happened, or delight at something that we saw in nature, or the concern about the divisions that Steve is talking about, where we have moral decisions to make that we really are trying to communicate or avoid communicating. If it's your brother that you're sort of totally the opposite of politically, and you still need that connection, that family connection. I think conversation And story, telling our stories is just even more important than ever.
And it's about safe places to tell our stories. The conference mission, vision, and core values talks about creating safe places. And safety has a lot of facets to it. Safe places where we can share our stories, where we can share our differences. There are not a lot of safe places for those conversations. But our churches should be a place. Lim and I agree, nice is not the goal, but kindness, when we look at 1 Corinthians 13, how love is described as a series of behaviors and attitudes that create a safe place, not a sameness place, but a safe place. Or, Wesley said, we don't have to all think alike, but might we not all love alike on our road to understanding one another, hearing one another's stories? That's my concern, is that the church creates safe places for engagement. We are, at our best, we're multi-generational, and we are not all the same. And we, at our best, we do have some differences. One of the things, Jane, when you talked about where we get our news, one of the things that's happened in the culture is we're all in echo chambers. Everybody's getting the news from the source we want to get our news from, right? And our Facebook feed or our social media feed are the people who bounce back. It's designed to bounce back what we already think. So safe places to engage with others around our common ground and across our difference. The church ought to be primed to be that place, but we are struggling.
So I hear three themes here. One is that safe space where we can tell stories. Another is a moral guidance. The third one is more earlier. In a very speedy, busy culture, need for some sort of a grounding or quiet space, so spiritual quietness or grounding.
I've experienced in the church in Milton Marlborough that, I've been going there almost 40 years. And I truly believe the congregation, some of the members are still the same. The members have become much more tolerant than they were 40 years ago when I first walked into that church. And it makes me feel very good.
Is back 40 years ago, there were programs for young people, children, sometimes for young adults, but everybody had their place. And today, it's seeming like some of our churches are working towards being in community with all ages, where there's room for everyone, no matter what the age, and people are more tolerant than they used to be. With young children, we used to send them always to the other room during worship. And I think we are in a place where we can be more welcoming.
There was a time when it was like the attractional model of church growth, right? And it was like, if you build it, they will come. But what the insidious shadow side of that was, we were doing, if you have a great youth group, a great music program, then people will come, right? But that's a consumer-minded model. We have this great product, come and make use of it. And that kind of, I think, in some ways skewed us off of the inviting people into discipleship, into a community of engagement, into a relationship with God and with one another that's more of a journey than I come, I get the great youth group, or I go shopping for who has the best youth group, who has the best music program. So rather than becoming disciples, we inadvertently became a bit of consumer-minded, and we do it with our financing of our churches. Rather than being stewards, we're fundraisers. Rather than saying, hey, giving is a facet of a healthy spiritual life. It's not about, here's our budget, what's your share of it? It's, oh, hey, giving and a celebration of abundance is a facet of a healthy spiritual life. So I want to give as a part of my spiritual nurture. And the last observation to make is what you said, Eileen, is we have the opportunity to have an intergenerational space. And that is more and more disappearing in our culture. I grew up in an extended family, so I had great grandparents still living. when I was young, and great aunts and uncles, cousins, dogs, but we all mixed it up on Sunday. Now more families are more nuclear, if you will, and that necessarily hasn't been ideal, and culture divides us generationally. But in the church, we have a chance to really mix it up, learn from one another, bless one another. I think the opportunity is actually there. I'm sorry, Albert, I'm probably leaning forward. But for me, when I look at what we sort of harvested, that attractional model of church growth, which by the way says nothing about a relationship with God, says a lot about us, but not as church growth, is a more consumer oriented thing. And then we're all killing ourselves trying to have the great youth group, the great music program, rather than to say, how do we nurture relationships with youth? How do we celebrate music together? How do we be a community together? That I think is where, and I hope that's where we're leaning into, because I also think that takes us back to Acts chapter 2. It takes us back to Jesus's model of engagement.
It does seem to me that, as Karen's talking about the possibilities of becoming truly intergenerational, and that being made possible in part by our consumeristic recent past of how we created church, I think that there are several factors that we've raised that point to what we've done right and what we've done wrong. So if we're going to talk about what we should do next, we should have a clear diagnosis, right? So we ceded moral high ground. We offered programs that would make people feel good. People felt good for a minute. I call it McDonald's theology. But then they felt bloated and terrible. So they went seeking something that would actually fill them. They found it elsewhere. Now our numbers are shrinking. We reminisce about the time when our pews were full, but that was actually the time of our greatest failing, right? Because we were at our highest level of consumer pleasing when our pews were the fullest, which put us farthest away from our actual call. So here we are at this place where, at this moment where we desperately need intergenerationalism. There's a need for older people in the lives of younger people. And there's a need for older people to hear the very different realities that younger people are living in, because they're the inheritors. So what do we want them to build out of this thing called church?
Learn more about the word discipleship. And as in the past, discipleship was basically a lot of head knowledge. You need to know this to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. And I think it's really more the heart. It's got to be not just what's in the head. It's got to be the heart and be heartfelt. And I think as lay people and as clergy people, we need to help people realize the shift, that it's the heart is the way in which we live out being a disciple, living in the image of Christ to others.
How do we nurture disciples? That seems to be the challenges that we face as well.
It's all about relationships and how you nurture those relationships.
Sort of core question that I associate with my Methodist practice, and this question you ask another member of your worship community or however you define your community even, and that is, how is it with your soul? And it is such a wide open question, and it goes to some of the things we've talked about in terms of communicating, building community, creating safe spaces, right? This simple question, how is it with your soul, gets to a very deep, meaningful conversation. And the notion, first of all, that I, who am asking the question, am interested in your condition is tremendously powerful.
Sure.
And I think that that is one of the things that we don't see enough of in our society and perhaps our congregations as well. But, if you've ever had somebody ask you, how is it with your soul? Or how's your spiritual condition? Or a question like that, and you've been in a space where you can actually answer it, it is a tremendously powerful experience to both cement that relationship and come to understand yourself better. And I think that is one of the things that I look for and I deeply desire in this spiritual community.
So when I think about what is leadership in the future of the church, I really see it as tearing down the infrastructure that we have. I know those are scary words, but really going back to Acts and rediscovering and reimagining what it means to be the people of Christ in the world of empire as we find it. And where are the places where our imperial world is out of sync with the teachings of Jesus? And then how are we going to disrupt? What tables are we going to overturn? And how are we going to bolster ourselves to do that work? And how are we going to do that with a dinner party? That's what Jesus did. He had dinner parties with wild groups of people, completely impossible groups of people, not nice people. All the people, they were messy. And I long for that messiness, those problem spots, the willingness to sit in the muck and celebrate the fact that we can only get clean together. I don't know that church looks like church in the future. My current one is I want to open a bookstore and a coffee shop, and I want to have hard conversations. Right? Like that's church.
I'm finding in my actual church work, that my church presence, that the most engaging conversations and the most story sharing and the most soul searching and the most respecting where each other's souls are, for me, tends to be happening at funerals, tends to be happening at retreat centers, tends to be happening after a conversation about something else. And I have people who have signed in with Zoom. I have people who have called me and had conversations on social media that are not church connected, that are just, I was thinking about what you said, blah, blah, blah. And can you talk to me about that? And I don't know how to make that transition. I mean, it's kind of like I'm already set up with a funeral, that they're kind of stuck there listening to me. And I managed to be able to do that into personal peace. And this, I've been told there's something about my demeanor that says I'm approachable. And there are places that I can have those conversations, but I don't know how to translate them into church community. So I hear Limina, and man, does it scare me. How do I do it without an institute? How do I do it without a building? How do I do it without? And yet everybody that I run into within my church communities, and we talk about inviting people in, and they go, well, I can do that, but everybody I hang around with is already churched. They already belong somewhere. And that's not what this is about. This is about the person who's seeking something different and seeking a place to be able to examine safely their soul and their spiritual presence and what their path is like. And I don't have a good handle on how to create that.
So this is what I'm hearing, in the world of lots of noise, both out in and out of the church, somehow the church leaders in this time needs an ability to really address the core, whether it's an individual about how is your soul going, or communal wise, what is the really core of what this Christian faith community is about, ability to discern what that core is, and in the midst of all the things that are demanded on him or her or them, to be able to discern, okay, this is what we as a Christian community is supposed to do, and supposed to live out, And two aspects that we have named was discipleship and the relationship, with that sort of like very focus, of what that core is about, then, whenever there are times that people are not interested in, but whether it's a funeral or crisis or just general retreat time, when they are somehow interested in and in touch with their hunger, that ability of the pastor and the community of the God's community to nurture that kind of community who can respond to that hunger, not from a sort of a consumeristic perspective where we're trying to lure them into something, but because what we do and what we have is just because they are just so good for the soul of people. The leaders of the faith community, Christian community, is nurtured by the community. But how do we nurture that kinds of a ability, the skills and graces, for us to have a very clear discernment and clear focus on the core of who we are and what we do?
I leave with that we need to allow ourselves to be open to really listen so that we can be in community to grow and nurture one another.
I think I leave with the idea that we have to be in relationship with our people, and on a one-to-one basis and on a basis of a congregation, but we have to be in relationship to hear their stories and be able to respond to them.
I picked my name for a reason, liminal space. It's threshold space. It's not here, not there, and it's sacred space, though we feel a need to get through it rather than be in it. I would say that I'm increasingly convicted that we are in liminal space. We are not where we were, and we are not yet where we are going to be, and we are not comfortable where we are.
I'm leaving feeling very good that I've gotten to connect faces with names that I've been reading. I feel very comfortable and very safe in this group. I thought about what this time together would be like. And now that we've had it, I'm going to reflect upon the different comments that were said. And I'm sure whatever I'm feeling now, some of it'll morph as I delve deeper into my soul. I've enjoyed this. I wish it could be larger or perhaps more often. And I thank you for the time and the thought-provoking that's going to go on in my soul in the future.
Last couple of weeks, we've been starting to prepare for this big apple festival that we have. It's our 51st year. And it's a beautiful thing that brings the whole community together. And working with a very small group of people preparing for that. And I love in-person meetings. Like Zoom meetings really don't do it for me. I'm a teacher too, and I had to teach online for a long time, and I hated it, and the kids hated it. And now that we're back to school in person next week anyways, it's a great thing. But I think the church should, you asked about what qualities or strengths the laity and the pastors should have. And I think the strengths that the laity needs to develop is trying to figure out how we can have more in-person time together, because and this is real specific to our particular church with this Apple Festival. It's a major fundraiser and all that. That's great financially, but what it does more than bring in money to our church is it brings our people together. You know, we sit together. Last couple of weeks, we worked together, making pie crust and rolling them out. But we really got to share an awful lot because we were in person together. And when you're in a Zoom meeting, you know, it seems like you only have, you know, just a short amount of time. And if you forget to say something, then, oh, that's it, too bad. But with in-person meetings, I think you get to share a lot more. And sharing is really important, I think, with people's spirituality and just togetherness. And I think it's important for growth. So if I could, you know, really wish something about, you know, congregations in general, I just wish that like the laity would have a stronger way of creating these in-person experiences where we're together in person.
To listen to each other, that I think our spiritual health is so tied to so many other aspects. Our nation's health is not good right now in a lot of ways. We talked very early in this session about divisions, you know, within families, and how we try to make sure that we're careful about those divisions because we do love the people that we sometimes have different views from. But the feeling that I think we need for each member to experience for their spiritual health is that they have been noticed and heard, and that noticing and hearing and listening is a sign that we care for that person one-to-one. I actually think that one of the blessings, oddly enough, about the Zoom and other kind of challenges to worship services is they got shorter. So there was more time before and after for people to talk and to connect and, you know, share simple things or heavier things, you know, family losses and that kind of thing. So it's a lot about the sharing. And I think that's the key to our spiritual health.
The idea of safe space, the idea of being vulnerable and sharing with each other who we are, and creating a space that's capable of doing that kind of holy listening is really the middle ground, the center ground for me. The fact that kindness seems to have been lost in the rush over the last couple of years. And it was amazing. I went to a concert Sunday night, and while the concert was going on, the massive crowd of people there were extremely kind to one another, got out of the way, did all sorts of stuff. But the minute they got behind the wheel and protected by that massive vehicle around them, they were the rudest people trying to get out of there. And it's been playing in my head ever since then. It's something about this face-to-face person not being surrounded with defenses that really connects us. And to model that is probably the most difficult piece, to just do it so that it's seen, and to encourage others that model it as well. And that wonderful piece of realizing what your purpose is, that somehow the difficult times we're going through serve a purpose in the larger scheme of things, that there's a gift that you can give to another person somehow. And hopefully our spiritual communities encourage us to discover what those gifts are and step out on them.
Very enlightening to say. Some good conversation here and everything. The concern I still feel deeply is the growth of this church in this new century, and how are we going to survive, or how we're going to morph into something that's viable for the society as a whole. And that's just always been troubling to me, and hopefully we'll find an answer.
Yeah, we're at a very critical point in the church's history, our history too, churches, and that, you know, has been said several times, you know, we have to create something new, different, try something new, different, because, the old way just may not work anymore. And we have to kind of realize that as a group. So, looking forward to having more conversation like this.
I guess what I leave with is gratitude for all of you, for everybody making time to have this conversation, for Pastor Albert setting it up, for all of you willing to jump on Zoom and be recorded reflecting on ministry. As I look at the Southern Valley Parish and your new configuration and relationship, you are a parish for which I have a great deal of hope and a lot of positive feeling. You have so many different gifts among you. You just have a lot of abundance. We have to figure out how to bring it all together, but there are so many gifts here and so much potential. So I'm really excited for the Southern Valley Parish and grateful that everybody took time to have this conversation. I would say, keep having the conversations. Let's keep making safe places for folks to engage with what does it mean to be the church? What does it mean to follow Jesus in this day? What does it mean to share what that following Jesus, what that is, how that has made a huge difference, all the difference in my life? How do I share that joy and hope and justice with others? That's the bottom line question, and let's keep having it, and let's keep loving each other. Patient, kind, gentle, look at 1 Corinthians 12. Let's just keep loving one another through that. So thank you. My takeaway is thanks. I'm excited for you.
I think, and I know it's part of the Methodist tradition, switching the pastors and not letting them grow in their community that they're in, I think is our church. We went through so many pastors, and we're glad. Unfortunately, COVID has had folks stay where they are for the most part, but we've been fortunate to have Pastor Han, but that's a while, having that consistency, and that, folks see that. There's people, when we had the event in Highland and on here who we know went to other churches. Part of the reason may have been because not a consistent pastor,
Joe, that is my territory. So let me make a response to that. Highland had the same pastor for 25 years too, by the way. But the norm has shifted over time. In the early circuit riding days, the pastor came through periodically, had multiple point charges. Then came the station church or the station churches. But Wesley moved his pastors constantly. Then if you look at the early 20th century to the middle of the 20th century, if you look at some of those lists of pastors who have served churches, they are 2 and 3 years, period. They were also moving very rapidly. Now, here's the difference. They were moving rapidly in a very stable culture. Our heritage is itineracy, is the pastors travel. And in a stable culture, traveling pastors brought something fresh and new. But Wesley also felt that that when we come together as community, so pastor and the community, we know from reading Corinthians, we have different gifts as churches, as individuals, as pastors. And as Corinthians reminds us, they're given for the common good. But each pastor, you look at the pastors in this meeting, each has different spiritual gifts and different skills. So when we bring a new pastor into a community, a new set of spiritual gifts, and by the power of the Holy Spirit and the nature of things, a new set of spiritual gifts rises in the community in relation to a different set of spiritual gifts from a pastor, because they are different. So it changes the community mix. By the grace of the Holy Spirit, that can be a really good change. But I personally know that it takes 4 years for a pastor to know a community, 4 years to really kind of get on the ground and have the relationships to move together. And the cabinet does not like 1 year, one and 2 year appointments are rare in the 21st century because that can be disruptive, but they were not rare in the 20th century. But now, as we are such a mobile culture and so many moving parts, it does take longer for a pastor to establish relationships and build that base of working. I say to SPRCs and pastors the same thing about being patient. Takes time. You know, plant a tomato seed and you're making sauce tomorrow. That being said, an excellent pastor cannot carry ministry for a church that is not committed to ministry, no matter how good the pastor is, right? So it's teamwork. And I think that's one of the questions you wanted to ask Pastor Albert is what are the pastoral leadership skills needed? And what are the laity leadership skills needed? Because it is a team effort. And as I said at the beginning of these remarks, the spiritual gifts are different in different pastors and in the community. And when we make that change, then we figure out how do we work together. I say to every SPRC, four stages: forming, storming, norming, performing. Forming is we made the appointment, we've established the new Southern Valley Parish. That is forming. You are here. Storming, oh, this is not what I thought it would be. Or, oh, you do it that way? Or, ooh, I don't know about that. Storming is when we discover our differences and we find that we get a little bumpy. Norming is we start to understand each other and how our gifts fit together. And performing is when we take off. But all that also cycles over time as the church changes. Not just pastors change. I did have one 15-year appointment. It was probably 3 or 4 appointments over that 15 years. It was necessary for me to keep it fresh. It was important for the people. 21st century itinerancy is a little different thing. And I would agree, we don't like the 1 and 2 year appointments. But there is a downside to long, and I can say from having been in a long-term appointment, there is a downside to long-term appointments. So those are also not the most effective.